sections on 2.4 rates of change. So this is actually two parts to this section, so we're going to do part A for today, okay? So in this one right here, we're continuing to find the slope. In this equation we have is f of x is equal to x cubed minus x, and the interval is between 1 and also 3. Notice they're in brackets. So as we learned in pre-calculus, if things are in brackets, we have actually two x values. This is like x1, and then this is like x2. If we have it in parentheses, then we have is actually x and y. So be careful of that. So we're going to go ahead and substitute in the 3 into all of this part right here. We're going to substitute 1 into all of this part right here. So the setup looks something like this. F of 3 minus f of 1 all over 3 minus 1. So if we substitute 3 into it, we get 3 cubed minus 3, so that's all of this right here. And then we put in 1 right here, so it's going to be 1 cubed minus 1, so that's all of this right here. And I just simplified 3 minus 1, which is the 2 right there, okay? Now, I put brackets in here, so that way I don't have too many parentheses, but if you like parentheses, you can always use parentheses, so it's up to your preference. So let's go ahead and simplify this. So 3 cubed is 27, 27 minus 3 is 24, and then 1 cubed is 1, 1 minus 1 is 0, so we have is 24 divided by 2 basically, which simplifies to 12. So that's the final slope for this equation. The example 2 I want to bring up is the sine and also radians as well. So as we learned on this right here, we have a sine and cosine right here. Cosine owns the x-axis, so if it lands cosine in this direction on the x-axis, we have a 1 and a negative 1. Sine owns the y-axis, so if sine lands on the y-axis, we have is positive 1 or negative 1. Other than that, then it's going to be zeros wherever they land at, if it doesn't own it, okay? So doing the same thing, we have is bracket negative pi and also 2 pi. So when we substitute it in, it's going to look something like this. 2 pi goes into this x right there. Negative pi is going to go into this x, and we're going to set it up something like this. So the 2 pi, sine of 2 pi, so 2 pi is 360 degrees, right? And we said sine does not own the x-axis. So sine of 2 pi is going to be 0. So it's going to be 0 plus 3 in that case right here. So that's all of 3. Then we have a sine of negative pi. So if you remember last year in pre-calculus, if it's a negative radian, we rotate the opposite direction. So we go this direction all around this if it's a negative radians, right? So in negative pi would actually land us in the same place right here at pi. And so we're finding sine of negative pi. Again, sine does not own the x-axis, so sine of negative pi is 0. 0 plus 3 is going to be 3. So that gives us the top part is 3 minus 3. The bottom part right here is 2 pi minus a negative, so that's negative and negative is positive. So you can add on to it, it's going to be 3 pi. But either way, 3 minus 3 is 0, so obviously this whole slope is going to turn out to be 0. Okay? Now the next one. The next one is finding the slope, but we're actually going to substitute in a plus h and then also f of a. We've actually done something like this similar early on, I believe in 2.1. So go back to your 2.1 notes and you can find that we did something similar to this. We're going to substitute in variables into the equation, and that's how we're going to work out the slope. So finding the slope of this right here of 1 over x, and we're going to substitute a plus h and also a. So the setup looks something like this. We have this f of a plus h minus f of a all over h. Make sure you also do the limit as h approaches to 0. Now you will not substitute in h of 0 right away, because if I substitute h of 0 right here, it's going to go undefined, since it's going to be something divided by 0 is undefined. You will not substitute in h of 0 until you are done with all your simplifying the algebra part of it, okay? So let's go ahead and substitute an a plus h into this equation right here, and also a into this equation. So this is what it looks like. We have is 1 over a plus h minus 1 over a, because that's the equation right here. So wherever there is an x, you're going to substitute it with those variables. All over h right there, okay? So as we learned back in 4th grade, if you have a fraction minus a fraction, you have to find a common denominator. So the common denominator in this case is not the a plus h. Because then some of you guys will say, well, then plus h is all I need on this side. No, it actually is the opposites of each other. There's nothing in common. So in this case, the a plus h needs more of is an a. And then on this side right here for the a, it needs more of is a plus h. So this is what it looks like. So on the top and bottom is a's over a, because that does not change the value. Remember, that is still equal to 1. And then on this side right here, we said it's the opposite right here. So that's a plus h over a plus h. Okay? So now we continue to simplify this. So the simplifying part of it, this is the 1 times a right there. negative, and then times this part right here, all over the common denominator, which is just a times a plus h, all over h. So this is what it looks like. So again, this is the 1 times a right there, that's this part right here, minus, that's this part right here. And then I took out the 1 because you don't really need that 1 times all of this part right here. But I do need it as a parentheses on the second part if you have two terms, because you're going to have to distribute this negative into the second part. Okay? All over the common denominator. So write this once on the common denominator, make it as simple as possible, and then all over still the h that we have. Okay? So now we're going to continue on with the algebra. So the algebra says I need to distribute this negative, and we want to try to drop the parentheses. So when we drop the parentheses, you have then is a minus h, because that's what I have right here from here to here. And we can see that the a's will cancel each other out. So we cancel out the a's right there. You're left with is just negative h from the top, still with the common denominator, all over h. Okay? Now this h right here, I can make it into a fraction, and the fraction will be then h over 1. So h over 1 is what we want to make it to. So that way when we have a fraction divided by a fraction, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of it. So when we multiply the reciprocal of h over 1, it's now going to become 1 over h right here. And the reason why is because then you can see that the h's right here will reduce to 1, right? Or negative 1 right here. So we reduce it, and it's going to look something like this, where the h's are gone, and you're left with a parentheses a plus h, which is that still that common denominator that we worked out. Okay? Now this is the most simplified that you can get. So I believe we can start now substituting in my h approaching to 0 into this equation, because that's the most simplified. So if I put in 0 to here, this is what it's going to look like. 0 right there. So that's going to leave me at a times a, right? Which is the same thing as a squared right there. Okay? That's your final answer in this case if it just has the variables of a plus h and a. Now if they ask us to continue on and find the slope, and they gave us the value of a, when in this case a is equal to positive 2, then we're going to substitute it into here and actually find the value of this. So if we find the value, it's going to be negative 1 all over 2 squared, which then becomes negative 1/4. So the actual value of the slope will be negative 1/4. Okay? So you may have to rewind or rewatch that, especially the fractions, finding common denominator, multiplying the reciprocal and things like that. But do so that way you're ready when we do the classwork. Okay.